Hello everyone, I can see people joining us, so we'll just give it a few seconds. Okay, I think we'll make a start then. Hello and welcome to this webinar from Cambridge, which today is all about embracing data and taking those first steps on your data journey in school. Before we start the presentation, I will go through a couple of housekeeping points. So to ensure good sound quality, all members of the audience are muted. If you would like to ask questions, please do. We'd love to hear from you. You can type them into the questions box, which it should be on the right-hand side of your screen. We will answer the questions at the end of the presentation. You will receive a certificate of attendance into your email inbox from GoToWebinar, and you will have a copy of the webinar recording sent to you via email in the next week. Okay, now that's over. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm delighted to be joined by Anna Hayesmore, our assessment expert and trainer, who will be taking us through the presentation today. But before I let her introduce herself, I will give you a quick introduction as to who we are. So at Cambridge, our aim is to support educators worldwide in improving educational outcomes. Cambridge Insight is a powerful range of digital baseline and attribute assessments that, together with teachers and schools' expertise, can make a measurable difference to educational outcomes. We've been developing innovative digital assessments for over 40 years now. And Cambridge Insight assessments are used by schools in more than 125 countries, and that number is growing every year. So our data is globally trusted, and we standardise against the biggest data set of any baseline provider, analysing more than 43 million data points each year to provide the most accurate and reliable predictions and reports. So Cambridge Insight assessments help schools understand the unique needs of every student and cohort to unlock their potential and increase the value a school can offer to all of its students' lives. So Anna, would you like to introduce yourself today?
Yes, it's really lovely to be here with you today. So I'm Anna, and I'm the product trainer for Cambridge Insight. And before my present role as product trainer for Cambridge Insight, I was a primary school teacher, senior leader and head teacher. I've spent many years in primary education. So I've spent a lot of my life looking at educational data and enjoying it. And so it's really lovely to be here with you today. And in today's session, we're going to think about how you feel about data. That's where we're going to start off. We're going to explore educational data and what it is. And then hopefully I'm going to give you some hints and tips and some steps into building your own data confidence. And we're going to use Cambridge Insight baseline data as some of our examples when we look at data on the way through today's session. But we're going to start by thinking about how you feel about data. And I think Grace has a poll for you.
Yeah, so that poll should be up there now. And while you are answering, I'll give you your opinion. I'm going to be completely honest as well. So I was also a primary school teacher in another life, and I can vividly remember my first role after all the teacher training, the very first staff meeting I went to. And, you know, I had books to mark, lessons to plan, a whole classroom to tidy. But that staff meeting, our head teacher split us up, sent us back to our classrooms with a printed out spreadsheet, all stuck together in about 3 pieces of paper, and told us to input our data. And I very nearly cried. I did not know what to do. I told you I was going to be completely honest. All that teacher training had focused on creating and delivering engaging lessons. So I didn't know what was meant to go in those columns. I didn't know how to define a student's learning at that point by a number. I didn't know what those numbers meant. Now, I realise my leadership team could have been a lot more supportive and clear in their instructions about what they were asking for, but that first introduction to school data has really stuck with me, and it got to the point where I dreaded just the mention of data, and I felt stuck that I did not know what to do at all. So it's very common, I hope. Um, I can see that there are some not at all confident, some that are fairly confident, and that's right, because as I did progress on, I did ask for help, and I did start to become a bit better at it, but that lingering kind of dread stayed with me for a while. So that's just my little anecdote about dealing with data in school, especially as an early years, early career teacher. Um, but Anna, how common is that experience, do you think?
Sadly, I think that experience is more common than it should be. And as a person who loves data and has used a lot of data, I do remember those points where I didn't feel confident at the beginning of my career as well. I think I was very lucky in my school leadership team when I first started that actually I did have access to help and support and to become more confident with using data quite quickly. And I'm really sorry that you had that experience. And today, hopefully, I can share some hints and tips to help other people to become a little bit more comfortable, to know where to start taking those first steps.
Absolutely. Well, you'll be very glad to know. So the poll, the results are trickling in, and I would say we've got maybe a good split. About there's about 36% of us that are fairly confident with data, so we're kind of in the middle ground. Um, about 20% that are not very confident, only slightly confident, and then about um, 40, 45% that are feeling very confident with their data. So thank you for sharing that with us, and we'll see how you feel again at the end of the session.
And I'm not surprised that you felt that way. In fact, I'm just going to turn my camera off now, if that's all right with
Yeah,
everyone, so I don't distract myself by waving my hands around. I think one of the leftovers of being a primary school teacher is gesticulating too much, so I should just turn my camera off. But yes, we do know that there are data challenges for teachers in schools, and low confidence is one of those things that comes out in surveys, that teachers don't feel confidence, and that's why they don't use data. Also, resistance to change, but then I think that goes alongside not being confident. If you're not confident using data, you're not going to want to change the way you work and use more data. So hopefully with increased confidence, people will feel more able to embrace that data and make changes. Sometimes schools have concerns about the quality of the data, and that's about using the right sources of data at the right time. And lots of teachers report that they just feel overwhelmed by how much data there is there, and they don't have enough time to look at all the data and use it in the right way. And they don't necessarily understand how to use the technology that would help them to look at that data and turn that into useful information. So let's take a step back just for a moment and think about data itself. What is data? Well, although we often think about data as numbers, we were talking about numbers in a spreadsheet a minute ago, you actually come across all sorts of data in your daily life because data is everywhere. It's all around us and you're using it all the time. And by data, all we mean is any raw, unorganized facts. So that might be numerical data like prices or temperatures and weather forecasts, or words like names, or longer text like survey responses. But it's when we process data, when we organize it and interpret it and give it context, then it becomes information. And information, of course, has meaning, and then we can use that information to support our decisions. So sometimes I think about it as data is like the raw ingredients, and then when we process that, we get the information. The information is more like the cooked meal that we get at the end. So what is data in education? So what kind of data are you going to find in schools? So you'll find scores, attendance data, demographics data about where students live and that kind of information. You get behaviour tracking information, you'll do teacher assessments, you'll have participation data, your observation notes, your notes from marking, all of that counts as data. And of course, you find data in school from formative and summative assessments, from the classroom tests you do, from observations, from measuring how engaged your students are, from notes that you take at parents' meetings. Lots of sources of data in school. And that data confidence that you'll hopefully develop during your career enables you to turn data into information, and then you can use it to make evidence-based decisions. Now, one of those types of educational data that we looked at there on that slide is assessment data, the data or the scores possibly that come from assessments, although of course not all educational assessments have scores. And one of those types of assessment are, for example, our Cambridge Insight baseline assessments. But why do we need to use assessments? Because surely, looking at that list, we've got lots of data already from working with our students. Well, if you assess or measure something, then you're going to obtain better or more data about it. So assessing increases your understanding of whatever it is you're measuring, and then that enables you to make good decisions and take the right actions. And this is our Assess for Success model. So on screen here, you can see we've got an assessment cycle. So this is designed to be implemented year on year with reflection and planning linking one year to the next. Now, of course, no one does want to be overloaded and overwhelmed with assessment data. And we know that that's one of the things that makes teachers feel a bit less confident is having too much assessment data. But if you engage with the right assessment data at the right point in the year, that can lead you on that path to proactive decision making and whole school improvement. So if we look at our cycle here, the assessment year begins with baseline assessment, like our Cambridge Insight baseline assessments, for example, and that gives you a kind of a raw measure of the ability of each of your students, and that helps you to understand what your learners could achieve. And then throughout the year, you'll assess for learning. So how are your learners doing? And then summative assessment at the end of the year helps you to understand how your learners did, which parts of this year's curriculum they mastered. And then this cycle repeats yearly. So you're going to reflect and use your assessment data actually at all points during this year to inform your planning at each step. And the assessment data will benefit everyone in school. So if you're a teacher, you'll use that data to think about how you can adjust your instruction to meet your students' needs and how you'll be able to know that they're making progress. If you're a school leader, it can help you to ensure that your students are progressing towards their key milestones. And also it can help you to understand how to support your teachers through professional development, for example, or even the use of different curricula or new resources. If you're a school group leader, that assessment data is going to help you to evaluate the group's strategies and find out what's working well and what needs changing. And of course, assessment data also benefits parents because then parents will understand how their child is being supported and making progress. And for students, and certainly older students, having some access to assessment data will help them to understand if their learning is moving them towards the goals that they want and help them to take responsibility for their own learning. So to sum up, educational data is really beneficial to everyone. It empowers teachers and school leaders. It can help you to make better decisions and improve your student outcomes. And the continuous use of school data fosters that culture of continuous improvement. Embracing those data-driven strategies, enjoying using data is going to help you to make sure that teaching and learning in your classroom and in your school adapts to the needs of your learners. So if you're not feeling confident with data, how can you start to build that confidence? You can see the benefits of using that data. How can you feel ready to start embracing that data? So I've got here a few hints and tips and things to think about for building your data confidence. Now, my first place to start, I think, would be to find out what data you have in your school. So how is data recorded and shared? Do you have access to the data from the assessments that your students take? And if you don't, could you ask a senior leader to share some more data with you? And that might be wellbeing data, behaviour data, attitudinal data, baseline assessments, end of year assessments. Go and have a really good dig around in your school and find out more about what's available that you could look at. Now, my second tip there, I've put find out if there are any professional development, is there opportunities available to you? Because there might be, or there might be opportunities available in your school group. And if there aren't, how about asking your senior leaders if they could add that to the professional development plans for the year? And of course, you can always look out for other webinar opportunities like this one. Now, my next tip, I think, is possibly the tip that helped me the most when I first started looking at educational data, and that is to find a data friend. So there might be somebody in your school who is more experienced with using data, and they might be willing to be a data mentor for you, someone that you can work with and that you can talk to about the data that you're looking at. But in fact, even if you can't find a more experienced colleague to be a data mentor, any colleague who's willing to explore and share and discuss data with you will be really useful. I really appreciated having my data friend. I really appreciated the fact that we could talk about data in a safe space, and we could really have that discussion about what it was showing, what it meant, the information that I could get from that, and what I could do with it next. Now, if you're a school leader, your data partner or your data friend might actually come from another school. And that might be another school in your school group, for example, who's using the same kind of data as yours. And again, it gives you that person to talk about the data with and make sure that you're understanding it, and hearing somebody else's point of view about it, what it's telling you, gives you that opportunity to learn. I've also put there, don't be afraid of making mistakes. And we tell this to the children that we're teaching, to our students, all of the time. You learn by making mistakes. But for us as adults, sometimes making mistakes feels more scary. But do keep asking questions. Try and make your school a safe place where you can ask those questions and share those insights. Be brave. If you're not sure about something, ask. And, it might spark other people's interests in data and help them to become more data confident too. Now, if you are just embarking on your first steps on your journey of using data, I would start small. So if you are new to a particular type of assessment data that you've not used before, start with a really small, manageable task. Work with your data friend to discuss what you think that data is telling you. And you will find that if you are successful in a small task, that's going to build your confidence. And it also reduces the overwhelm of having too much information to look at and not knowing where to start. And then you'll begin to see how those numbers, those scores, that data brings extra knowledge for you. And I think starting small and being successful spurs you on to then go and look deeper into your data. Do remember to build in time for reflection as you take your steps along your data journey. So do acknowledge any challenges. As I said, do involve your friend along the way. But think about the data that you've chosen to look at and the way you're using it. So if the assessments that you're using or the data that you're looking at isn't giving you information that's useful, or you think actually it would be better to have done this at a different point in the academic year, then collaborate with your colleagues to find a way that works better. And then finally, my last tip for building your data confidence is to celebrate your success. We sometimes forget to congratulate ourselves and to feel proud or happy about something that we've done, and acknowledge that you've done something well. So share the power of your data-driven decisions. So if you've looked at some data and then you've changed a teaching strategy or a curriculum resource, or if you've used a new intervention and you based that on your use of assessment data, and then your students go on to make better progress because of it, share it, celebrate it, allow yourself a little pat on the back, and it will drive you forwards to look at more data and at data more deeply. So you're at the beginning of your journey. You have found a data friend and you're ready to start. Now, start small was one of my pieces of advice, but what does that mean? What does that first tiny step look like? So my advice here is to choose one source of data that you have available to you in your school. So you might go with one particular assessment that you use. For example, that might be baseline assessment. In fact, you might be a Cambridge Insight baseline user, so you might have some Cambridge Insight baseline assessment data. Now, once you've chosen the type of data that you're going to look at, your next step will be to find out more about the information that that type of data will give you. So you do need to understand how that data is designed to be used so that you know the kind of information you're going to get from it, and you recognize what kinds of things you're going to find out. So if you've chosen baseline assessment data to look at, like Cambridge Insight baseline assessment data, for example, this is what it's designed to do for you. So baseline assessments are generally used, and ours is designed to be used at the beginning of a year or a stage, or whenever new students join your school. Because baseline assessments are designed to give you a, this is where we're starting from, this is what I know at the moment kind of information. So a baseline assessment will provide you with insights into a student's core skills and abilities. And our baseline assessments are curriculum agnostic, so they can be used by any school, whatever curriculum that you use. And it will provide you into those insights so that you can identify your students' individual strengths and needs, and group strengths and needs. And then you can differentiate your teaching and learning using your skills right from the start as soon as you get that information. So it really speeds up any getting to know you time. And of course, that helps teachers and the schools to know where to focus your resources and your support. And if you're using our secondary baselines, that also will provide you with predictions of future exam success. And that helps you to set goals and targets, and so that you can help your students to either meet or exceed those. And then at the end, it provides measures of progress so that you can evaluate the impact of your teaching or your school on your students' outcomes. So our baseline assessments are designed to help you answer questions like these. So you'll be able to understand how your class or your cohort has performed in the assessed areas. So with Cambridge Insight baseline assessments, these are core skills, and they do vary slightly depending upon the age of your students. So focused around literacy, numeracy, maths, reading, spelling. Um, in secondary, that's vocabulary, and then also some non-verbal assessments as well. So this means that you will learn about those core skills that are used right across the curriculum and your students' general aptitude for learning their academic potential. Baseline assessment will also help you to see who stands out and why, who's performed well, who's not performed well, are there any surprises? And it will help you to identify where students need more support or more challenge. And then you can prioritise areas for teaching, for individuals or for groups. Now, as I said, if you're using our secondary products, you'll get those predictions of future exam performance. So understanding how your students might perform in their final exams can also help you to plan towards that. And then what targets might you set for your students or schools? Because once you have this objective information, this data about core skills and academic potential and predictors of future exam outcomes, you can then set goals for individuals, groups, and school improvement. And it's really important to do this exploring phase. You do need to understand the purpose of the data that you've chosen to look at and understand what you can use that data for, and then you'll be ready to start exploring the data. Now, if it's a new type of data for you, I did say start small and find your friend. So start small by selecting one student. So I advise selecting a student that you teach that you already know a little bit about. So I've chosen my student, I've got my friend by my side, and here I'm looking at one of our baseline assessment reports. So this is our individual student report. So this is one report about one student. And then look at it. What story is it telling you? How can you turn that data into information? So remember the purpose of whichever assessment you're looking at, but we know that ours here is telling you about strengths and needs in core skills. So we've got some numbers in the table, and we've also got a chart. And the chart's going to help us to visualize quickly and easily where students are performing below or above average. Our score charts are flagged with orange or green, which will also help us to understand where students are performing above or below average. And this is a really good place to start because we also provide you with some written scores interpretation guidance. So that will help you to make sure that you've understood what that data is telling you. So if I look at that chart there, that visualization, I can see that this student is weakest in spelling, for example. So that would lead me to explore what that student might need to help them to improve in spelling. They're doing quite well in arithmetic, which is nice to know. So some of the strategies I'm using for teaching arithmetic are helping them as well. So a really good place to start, one report for one student, discuss it with a friend. What does that tell you? What have you learned about that student? So having looked at that one report, which helps you to find out about their core skills, you've identified those strengths and those areas for support. Is there any other information for this student within this assessment? Now, if you're using Cambridge Primary Insight, you'll see progress data. If you're using Midges, Ellis or Alice, our secondary product, you'll see predictions data. So whichever assessment you're using, go and have a look and see what other information you can get from it. What other data is there? And then what does that add to your knowledge of this student? So if this is a primary student and you are using Cambridge Primary Insight, you'll see charts like the one on the left there. So this is showing you progress. So that's adding to your understanding of this student. You'll see the progress from last year's baseline and the year before's baseline and the year before that. So you'll be able to see places where they haven't made typical progress, for example. So if they've made less than typical progress, you'll know that that's an area where you want to put something in place so they don't fall behind. But if they've made more than typical progress, you can celebrate that success. Go and find out what worked so well last year, and then you'll know that that's an effective strategy and you can carry on doing that. And then on the right-hand side there, I've got some of those predictions reports for our secondary students, showing you those potential outcomes. So you can use that to think about targets to set for a student, but also to think about what you or they are going to do to give them the best chance of success to meet or even exceed those predictions. So by looking at their baseline assessment data, you've gained some really good objective insights for this student about where their core skills are, their progress, their potential outcomes. And you may have discovered that this confirms some of the ideas that you had already. You may have noticed some surprises in there as well. But of course, data shouldn't be used in isolation. And we know that we've got lots of sources of data in school, and the more detailed a picture you have of any student, the better. So the next step is to contextualize your data. So by that, I mean, go and find out more about that student. So we're still sticking with that one student. We've looked at their assessment data from their baseline assessment, and now we're going to go and find out what other data we have about that student. So think about the other sources of data we thought about at the beginning of the session. So you might have attendance data, well-being data, some behaviour data, other test scores, their classwork, you've got their books. You might have recorded attitude to learning data. You might have recorded conversations with parents or other members of staff. So build your picture of that student. And you've seen on screen now, I've just popped our wellbeing check guide and our attitudes assessment guide there as well, because that might be other data that you have too. And of course, the more detailed your picture is, the better able you will be to put the right plans in place to meet the specific needs of the student that you're looking at. So imagine that your baseline data tells you, for example, that they've got a low score in mathematics. So you'll know that you need to support them with that. But what's the best way to do that? Well, gather more information. So if you use Cambridge Primary Insight, you'll be able to see which part of maths they struggled with. So maybe that was data handling. So you'll go and look at their maths books. You'll talk to last year's teacher, go and find their attendance record from last year. And then maybe you'll find out that they were unwell and they missed some important teaching points when the class was, I don't know, learning about probability, for example. And then the right approach for that student then would perhaps be to arrange some targeted sessions to cover those gaps in learning, and then they can continue to build on that firm understanding when the topic comes around again. And you can be really confident in your approach because it's a data-driven decision and it ensures that gap in understanding isn't missed. And of course, remember that discussing your ideas with a colleague is going to help you to decide what to do next. So make your next step decision a data-driven decision. And keep asking yourself, what does the data show are the priorities for that student and how can you support it? Would they benefit from an individual intervention like the example I just gave? Or would it be better to use that information in your classroom planning? And you might use it to adjust planning. And that might be adjusting your short-term planning, what you're going to do this week. But you could think about how that might impact your medium-term and long-term planning, because you might identify places where you'll want to spend longer or some areas where you won't need to allocate so much time, for example. And then what teaching and learning principles, ideas and activities will you use to meet your students' needs? And if your school uses Cambridge Primary Insight, it helps you here with that next step because you'll have access to evidence-based teaching and learning guidance that are based on a student's baseline score and age. So this is research-backed teaching and learning ideas and activities like the one you can see on screen there at the moment. And I say that is matched to the scores, the data that you're from the baseline assessment. So now you're feeling really confident with the information that the data is giving you about this student. You've got a really big picture, really detailed picture of this student, and you understand what their needs are, and you've decided what you're going to do next to support them. Feeling confident means that you can then, of course, go and share that. So you might want to share that with a school leader when you're having a discussion meeting about the student, or you might want to share that with a colleague. So it would be a good idea to share your understanding, your information that you've gathered with perhaps teaching assistants who support in the class, and then they can also help to support your students in the right way. Or of course, you might want to share that with a parent. And you will find we have specific reports with our baseline assessments to help you to share baseline assessment data with parents there. That's the report you can see on the right-hand side. So you can talk to your parents about how they performed and what that means and what your next steps are. And you can do that confidently because your professional judgments are backed by that data. And it helps everyone, if you share that data, to understand what the students need, and then everyone can be supporting and challenging this student in the right way with that collaborative and joined up approach. And then, of course, by starting small, you've practiced your data skills and you'll feel more confident with interpreting and using the assessment data that you have in your school. But of course, we don't only teach one student. We teach groups of students. And you may have already found out that when you started looking at the data for one student, you automatically started thinking about other similar students in your class and how your data-driven ideas for one would benefit others as well. So your next step, of course, is to go and look at bigger groups of students. So look at a bigger data set. So for example, you might want to look at the scores table there on the right that contains all of the scores for all of your students in your class. And you can look for patterns and trends, and that again can lead to data-informed decisions for your planning. Or that report on the left there is a group overview so that you can see the strengths and the needs of different year groups in your school. And of course, once you start looking at those bigger data sets, you'll find, I'm sure, like I did, that you get very excited by that data and what it's telling you and become a bit like a data detective. And then collaborating with colleagues to build that fuller picture and plan next steps based on that data for all of your students becomes, really exciting and a real possibility. So your data journey starts here. It starts from your small first steps, and then your confidence will grow. So find that data friend, choose that one assessment, select an individual student, build that bigger picture for an individual student and make some data-driven next steps decisions. Share that information with colleagues and parents, and then begin to apply your skills to bigger groups. And that is going to benefit you and your students. And of course, that last step is very important. Don't forget to celebrate your successes. And as you are becoming more confident in your data, you might want to take some next steps beyond those first steps. And what might they look like? Now, I really do recommend looking for other opportunities to develop your skills in using education data. You want to keep practicing it, keep using those skills. Data isn't a once a year activity, it's an all-round activity. So go and find some more inspiration and some more learning opportunities. And you can find some of those with Cambridge Insight. So if you head over to our website, for example, you'll find that we've got blogs that contain information about how to use and understand data. We have case studies that tell you about how other schools have used data. We have a podcast series, again with lots of information about using data and different types of data. And we've got some quick guides that are also there to support you with the use of data. Or you can always join other webinars like this one. And say if you are a Cambridge Insight user, you can come to training webinars with me, and I'll talk about our reports in more detail and really help you to get the best use out of the data that you'll get from baseline assessments. Or if you're really interested in continuing to develop those data skills in more detail, you might want to look at our assessment network's professional development opportunities. And the assessment network offers a range of courses that will support teachers and school leaders, people just like you. And one of their courses focuses specifically on educational data, so understanding it and using it. And that's suitable for teachers, school leaders, anyone who works with education data, and you'll get a really solid understanding of assessment data and what it means and how to use it. And the assessment network have lots of other assessment opportunities for training as well. So we started today's session by asking how you feel about data. Were you lacking in confidence or feeling overwhelmed, feel you didn't have enough time, or just simply not knowing where to start? So I'm hoping that today's session has helped you to think a little bit about where you are in your data journey and perhaps start to make some plans for your next steps in building your data confidence. And I can see that Grace is just putting the poll back up on screen again. We'll see if perhaps your data confidence has improved during today's session. So I really do recommend going away from this session and thinking about, okay, where am I? What am I going to do next? What's one thing I can go back into school and do to improve my confidence? Who am I going to find for my data friend, for example, who we can do this together?
Thank you so much, Anna. That was so interesting and some really good tips. I'm really pleased to say that most people, we don't have anyone that's not at all confident at the minute. So that's a positive. It is quite a daunting journey, but it is so worth it for the difference it can make to students learning. Just by having all that information, it can really impact their outcomes and their lives, really. So I'm going to see if I can share this. No, it's not letting me. Um, okay, let's see. So I can tell you the percentages. We've got about 20% are extremely confident feeling. We've got 33% are very confident and 33% are fairly confident. We've still got about 10% that are slightly confident, but zero at not at all. So thank you very much. And I hope those really concrete tips you can take away and start small, as Anna said. I really, really wish that I'd had someone in my ear to tell me that when I was in the classroom. Um, I'm going to end the poll there, so thank you very much. And if you have any questions about your data journey, uh, you can put them into the chat box. Or the questions box even, and we can answer them for you. Or if you need some time to digest and you have questions, you can always send them in at insight to email insight@cambridge.org. Can see we've got a couple of questions trickling in. So how this one is coming through. So if so I am excited about data and I can see the benefits, but my colleagues are not embracing it. How do I get my colleagues on board?
I think the best way to do that is to continue to be kind of a role model for them. You being excited about data will help. And remember, one of my tips was share your successes, talk to other people about it. So when you've found something in the data and you've acted upon it and it's had a positive impact for your students, um, Share that with your colleagues. Explain to them what you did and how you found that out. You can always ask your senior leaders if you can include some of those types of data sharing ideas and successes in staff meetings, for example. Um, you can be there to act as the enthusiastic person and help to get other people on side. And when they see that it works, that's generally the most important way. Yeah, that works best to help to get people onto your side when they can see the benefits of it and that it's actually helping your students.
Thank you. Um, and we've got another one. How long is data actually useful for? There's so much of it. Um, when does it just pile up?
I can feel a bit of overwhelm possibly here in this question. I think it goes back to that cycle, that assess for success cycle that I showed towards the beginning of the webinar, and thinking about looking at the right types of data at the right time of year. And again, making sure that you start with the data that's going to give you the most useful information for what you want to use it for at that point, and then build on from there. But I think if you start with that assess for success cycle, so you're looking at the right data at the right time of year, that kind of reduces the overwhelm of too much data all at once.
Thank you. I I think those were the two questions that were there. I think we've given lots of people lots to think about. So I think we can end the session today there. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for sharing your expertise, Anna. Always welcome. And as I said at the beginning, you'll get a recording of this session, which you can share with your colleagues, and you'll get a certificate as well. Thank you very much again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.